Welcome to India Australia Mood Board. Well, that was quick. All right, shall we get into the most important thing of why Australia lost that test? You could very easily phrase that why India won that test. But I think in this particular case, why Australia lost that test is maybe the slightly more interesting and slightly more important question right at the moment. Alex Carey can only sweep. Peter Hanscom is not really a spin specialist. David Warner was away from home. R. Ashwood exists. Pitch mindset is a thing. Two early wickets to seam. Travis Head, maybe as well. Green, Hazelwood, Stark, if you want to throw in everyone. Nathan Lyon in Asia. Rohit Sharma again. What am I missing here? Akshar Jadeja partnership. Pitch eased off, but the batting, India kept batting on it. Left-handers, partnerships, starts. 3 for 160 compared to 170 odd not out, all out, whatever. 3 for 160 versus 170 odd, all out. I think that's the majority of the reasons that happened. But let us get into the nitty gritty. We'll try and if I'd had slightly more time, no one was cheering for Scott Boland and Nathan Lyon to defend for longer than I was. Todd Murphy's little weird club cricket chip shot certainly made us rush. But we've got lots of stuff for today. But to get to the full debrief of Australia, we'll probably have to do a proper video for you tomorrow. But let's start with Akshar Patel in first-class cricket, because I have a question for you. Can Akshar Patel bat? And I know that we all assume that he has some batting talent. And this innings has just proved that again. He's quite often called an all-rounder, just maybe slightly stretching what he can do, right? He's probably more of a bowler who is a handy batter, which is also a very, very fine thing to do. Of course, because he has Ashwin and Jadeja in this particular side available to him, that also allows for him to bat a little bit further down the order, which is even more of a comfy right. In this innings, he went down even further down the order. So it was absolutely incredible. But the interesting thing about that is that this is his record batting in first-class cricket in his career. Now, I would say that he's played less in modern times, just because, since COVID, almost everyone's played less first-class cricket. But there is no doubt that over the last few years, his batting has slipped. And if you think this is just first-class cricket, I looked at his T20 numbers. It's very similar. Not quite as steep, the drop. But again, for someone who I've thought over the last couple of years has been quite a good T20 batter, you could just see how early in his career he was a lot better. So there is absolutely there's no doubt that as his bowling has become so good that he has to be picked in an Indian test team, his batting has slipped off from probably what we saw when he was a player, when he was younger and coming through the system. So my next question is, can he face off spin? Well, before this test, Akshar Patel averaged over 40 against left arm finger spin. We've seen him in the IPL and for India smash that around, so that's not completely a surprise. Also before this test, he was averaging 15 against off spin. He almost doubled it in this knock. So, small sample sizes and everything there. But I did check his T20 record as well. There he averages 12 against off spin. And he's striking at a strike rate of 84. So he really is not a player who has shown any great skill against off spin in his career so far. And so all credit to him, because this was a very important innings and he had to go up against two of them on a surface that favored them. There was certainly spin there. There was certainly inconsistent spin there at times. And so from that perspective, I think all credit goes to him. And there's some really interesting things to note from his innings. For one is he actually went out there when the new ball had been taken after Rohit Sharma had been bowled by Pat Cummins, which meant that for the first 16 overs or so, I don't think he really faced back-to-back overs of off-spin very often. He faced a lot of seam in that time. The other thing was that he started incredibly slow in his innings. He was 4 from 33 balls, which, thinking back, I didn't feel that he had started that slow. Perhaps because Jadeja was going slow as well. And then by the time I sort of looked up, he had a decent score on the board, but he certainly started very slowly. the other thing is just the way he faced the off spinners. He really sweated on the length a lot. And when the ball was short, and he didn't get that many options, but he did get a couple of opportunities there. He cut the ball, and when it was overpitched, he drove. It was a very sensible way of playing the off spin, especially for someone who wasn't particularly set up to play them before this innings. Look, there are advantages to Akshar's innings as well. I think one was obviously the Australian bowlers were tired when he came out. The pitch was probably at its best for batting when he was out there for a good period of that as well. But considering that there was off spin at both ends, and he hasn't made a lot of first class runs in a long time, and realistically, he was probably on his way to 100 before he had to bat with the tail and went out slogging towards the end. So absolutely fantastic innings. Well played, young man. I hate that phrase, but English people say it all the time, and now it's in my head. I hate that phrase. Anyway, Akshar versus off spin, though. I just want to go one slightly step ahead, and this is less about Akshar, but I can tell the story a little bit here about the difference between the Australian spinners and the Indian spinners. So this is Akshar's record versus all the off spinners he's faced in Test cricket. He's faced 2 balls against Matt Renshaw, by the way, not in this test. Or was it in this test? Did Matt Renshaw bowl? I don't know when he faced 2 balls against Matt Renshaw, actually, now that I've brought it up. But anyway, it came up on my database. So you can see here, Nathan Lyon, Todd Murphy, Will Somerville. They're the 3 spinners he has faced the most of. Off spinners, sorry, he's faced the most of. And then you can see the next 2 spinners, he's faced slightly fewer balls against Mahdi Hassan and not very many balls against Moeen Ali. Both of them have got him out twice. So those are the only 4 wickets he's had so far when facing off spin. Hassan and Moeen Ali are both side spinners of the ball. So more your traditional kind of off spinners where they, come around the side of the ball and they're trying to get the ball to deviate as much as possible. The other 3 spinners that he's faced a lot of, Nathan Lyon, Todd Murphy, and Will Somerville, all 3 of them are basically Australian style spinners. They bowl with overspin. Will Somerville, of course, is a New Zealand spinner in that he plays for New Zealand, but he's also a Sheffield Shield bowler for New South Wales. And kind of, if you watch him bowl, he profiles a lot more like an Australian off spinner than he does a New Zealand off spinner, which is again in that sort of more overspinning style. And I think that while that might matter for Akshar, and that might have been one of the reasons he found it a little bit easier to face this kind of off spin on this kind of surface, I think it actually has a far bigger impact on Australian cricket. So if you look at Nathan Lyon's record, for instance, it's an incredible record for a spinner who's been so successful in Test cricket for such a long time with so many wickets. But you can actually see here that this is him in every single test venue, right? There are only 3 places in the world Nathan Lyon has a bowling average better than 30. And if you usually would say that about a spinner, you'd probably think, hopefully home, but maybe not home. And then you'd be thinking Asia would be the other ones. But you can see that outside of Bangladesh, where he has a very good record, but I'll explain that in a minute, his actual best bowling places are the West Indies and New Zealand. That's not something that you generally would associate with a finger spinner. And the Bangladesh one's interesting too, because he does have an incredibly low average in Bangladesh, but it's only from 2 tests. And if you go forward, and obviously this is by nation, but I want to look at it by continent as well, because I think this is very, very interesting when you have a look at that. So Muku, if you could go to the Nathan Lyon by continent slide for me, please. Look at that mood board. Looking glorious, Muku. Top work. Here we go. If you look by continent, I've just realized I stuffed up the end and still have the countries. You're going to have to ignore the second half of the graph where I made the mistake. Sorry, everyone. But if you look at the front, okay, so in Africa, he's averaging 40. Absolutely, what we would expect. Got a good average in the West Indies, right? Then you've got his Asian average, which is higher than what he does in England and also higher than he has at home. That's not what you expect from a frontline off spinner. And part of the reason for that is because traditionally he's probably bowled a little bit slow, although that wasn't a problem in this test. And the other one is that he likes bounce. That is how he is so good at bowling off spin all around the world. It's because he has the ability to keep himself in the game by bounce. Asia kind of takes that main skill away from him. So what does all that mean, right? It means that Australia has a floor-raising spinner who can bowl anywhere in the world. But when they get to Asia, they don't have a destroyer as their frontline spinner. And the easiest way to have a look at this is just how different the game looked when I know Lyon was tired, so it's a little bit unfair. And I know scoreboard pressure can sometimes play a part in all these things, but just the dynamism that that Ashwin had, and it's always unfair to compare Ashwin to anyone, but even Jadeja, again, their ability to get side spin on the ball just made it look a lot more dangerous than what Lyon made it look. And that is because we have seen this with Lyon again and again. He just doesn't completely have that kind of game that is translated to Asia. In fact, I've done whole videos online before. As you probably know, he's a better bowler in the first innings than he can be towards the end of the game. It's again, that's because that's when the bounce is usually at its most in a test match wicket. All right, let's move on to him. And from that graph that I stuffed up, sorry everyone for that. Khawaja. So I just want to focus on something that happened in his wicket. Remember that for the best part of 2 sessions, we saw Jadeja and Akshar scoring runs as left-handers against offspin, and then Usman Khawaja comes out and it was out dismissed almost immediately against Ashwin. Now, clearly, Ashwin is a better bowler than Murphy or Lyon, so that obviously needs to be factored in. But you can also see that Khawaja is driving from the rough. Put a little exploding emoji. You look at that puff of dust. It was quite clear from the start that ball was going to land in and around the foot marks, and then you can have a ball land in the foot marks and not do what this particular ball did. But if you look at Khawaja, he's driving from the rough. It's early in his innings. It's against the spin, and it's against the new ball. Plus, he didn't get to the pitch of it. That's a lot of different errors in one thing to go over. And it's really interesting mistakes. And if the ball doesn't explode, I don't know, maybe he punches it to cover, maybe even, gets it away for runs. But it did explode. And of course, he's out. So I just want to we're going back to some of Akshar's innings here, because I was taking a big look at him when I was trying to work out how he made the runs against the off spinners, because I think that's a really interesting thing to go back with. And so I came up with this, which is actually, I think, fairly interesting. So we've already talked about the fact that he's not particularly good against off spin, but made runs against it. These are his drives against the off spinner. So we're comparing it directly to what we just saw with Khawaja, right? If you go, we're going to start left to right, and these happen in chronological order as his innings went through. So the first one on the left, you can see that is a ball that is pitched on the good part of the wicket. So it hasn't gone into the foot marks, and he hits that for 4. You can see there's another ball not long after that he gets a single from, again, comfortably driving it, despite the fact that comfortably driving it because it is not from the foot marks, right? It is pitched up and straight on the good part of the wicket. The next 2 are slightly more interesting, because the next 2 were both a little bit more over pitched, but into the foot marks in a similar position to where Usman Khawaja's is. In this situation, actually one of these balls was edged, but luckily for Jadeja, when it was edged, it didn't really matter. And then you can see that again, there's another ball that was bowled on the pitch, in the middle of the pitch, without any problems to Jadeja there. He kicked down the wicket here, used his feet really well, smashed this one for 6. We're talking about here, we've already discussed Jadeja as not being a very good player of off spin. We've already talked about the fact that he hasn't really made a lot of first-class runs over the last couple of years. And yet, the amount of mistakes that he made in a long innings against off-spin compared to Usman Khawaja in a short innings is remarkable. We can talk about the fact that Australia have too many left-handers and Ashwin is a left-handed killer and all those sorts of things. But if you're making as many mistakes as Khawaja did, chances are you're going to be dismissed. And if you bat as well as Akshar did over a long period of time, you might eventually still succumb to the left to the off spin. And he could have edged that other one and gone out. And I think that might have been just after he was 50, and it would have been absolutely fine. Instead, he ends up playing a very, very long innings, and that's the difference there. Talking about Australian left-handers who didn't particularly make a lot of runs, it's worth having a look at Alex Carey. I think I said coming into this series that I projected him to be the best left-hander of the Australians, I guess, against spin. He played a fairly good knock in the first innings. It was short. Those are the kind of innings I kind of expect more from him, 30 and 40s. Maybe occasionally he'll go on and do something a little bit more like what Akshar did. But he has two big advantages, I think, over the other Australian left-handers. The sweep shot is one, and the other one is that because he scores quite quickly, he puts pressure back on, by attacking. But clearly he has one shot he trusts, which is the sweep shot. In fact, Alex Carey's gone completely sweep mad. So I looked at all the different deliveries I looked at all the different balls that Alex Carey faced in this test match from spin. And you can see here, he basically swept 2/3 of all the different deliveries. He played 18 different kinds of sweeps altogether. And he only played three other attacking shots that were not sweeps. Played 7 defensive shots as well in there. It's just absolutely ridiculous. For me, as an analyst, when I'm looking at whether a player sweeps or not, and I'm going to tell a bowler this guy's a sweeper or not a sweeper, I'm usually looking if they sweep it more than 5% of the time. This is not the kind of pattern that you would expect. This is a compulsive sweeper. I'm not sure if we use that phrase in cricket, but hey, let's use it for this one. But more importantly, I think when you see something like this is something you see a lot when players go to Asia that aren't used to Asian conditions or haven't batted there a lot, or just non-Asian players in general. That they come in with what is one plan, but it's actually a bit of a muddled idea. So having the sweep shot is fine, and in fact, India had to deal with it in the first innings. They set the fields even more strictly for him in the second innings because he did give them some bother in the first innings, right? But when you are playing this shot and it is your only shot, that means that there is huge problems here. Certainly playing it more than you've played any defensive shot seems to be another issue, even if you are an attacking player. This just feels like, to me, as I said, a classic non-Asian player batting in Asia, where essentially a solid theory becomes a creepy obsession. All right, let's just move on to the partnerships one. This is actually from the first inning. So, this is when I was thinking that, this is when I was thinking that Mohammad Shami might get an 80. I think I've seen Mohammad Shami get a 50, actually. Trent Bridge. Oh, because that was a bad test. Jimmy Anderson got 80 in that test as well. I saw a lot of number 11s bat for long periods of time in that particular match. But I was working on the partnerships at that stage where I thought, Australia might at least get close to stumps. I didn't think, yesterday I thought this test might be over today, but certainly didn't think it would end as quickly. But this is something I just want to bring up because of how often the Australians have talked about this. So the biggest difference between the two sides has obviously been the batters early on in their innings. It's very clear that the Australians are not trusting the surface that they are going out on, and they look at the pitch like it's electrified more often than not. And part of this is because of how much they talk about, how much they focus on not losing wickets in bunches. So I think Australians really see the pitch as a binary thing at times, either flat or fiery in India, and there's almost no in between. And so they seem to then, when they lose a wicket, almost go into this other mode of batting that is like a survival version, and clearly not a very successful version of that as well. But when they do that, I think they look beyond just normal batting. So, for instance, there was a ball today where I think after a wicket, it might have been after Marnus had gone, after Usman had been dismissed, and Marnus was out there batting, and one of the Indian bowlers overpitched. And Marnus was in such a defensive position and such a defensive mindset, thinking he had to get through the next few overs, that what should have been probably an easy cover drive for 4 that we saw from him play in the first innings, in the second innings, he just kind of stabbed at the ball, and he was lucky to actually end up picking the gap. But it was a very, very odd sort of robotic shot. You watch the Indian batters when they come in. Now, obviously, they're at home and they're not facing Ashwin and Jadeja, so there's a lot of advantages here. But they're just batting normally. right? They're coming in like a new batter and going, okay, well, this is a good ball, so I'm going to defend this. This ball I can probably push into this gap and get a single. Oh, and he's made a mistake here, and I'll hit it for 4, which means that even when the Indian batters didn't make a lot of runs, you can see that the partnerships, they still got little partnerships before the wickets went. Players were still going before they were set, but you see partnerships of 17, 16, 17, 11, all the way through there. And you compare that to Australia, where you have partnerships of 2, 0, 0, 1, 3, 1. Not quite binary, but it's a very, very different situation. And I think it just shows that Australia is almost resetting the way they think about cricket after every wicket, whereas actually the same basic skills are required, right? If they bowl a bad ball, you want to try and hit that for 4. If they bowl a ball that isn't that threatening, you can push that for 1. And for everything else, you want to, dead bat it. That's just test batting 101. There are times in this test match when I didn't think that was how Australia were going about things. All right. It's worth just looking at, I think we've got another couple of graphs here. Sorry, everyone. Here we go. So India's middle order and lower order in home tests, so pre and post COVID, it's been notable how well they've been getting. Now, this includes, I think, Giant Yadav's 100. Obviously, today the batting order was slightly different, as well as some of the batters were slightly lower down. Although I suppose Ashwin's runs don't go into that total, but you can see that before COVID, positions 3 to 5 were doing really, really well, and the middle and the lower middle order was chipping in. But since COVID, there has been a really, really big change, and the Indian batters are just not making runs the way that they used to. We're all aware of that. But what is interesting is you've had enough of a step up from that other part of the batting that it's overcome that. And that it's really that partnership that we're talking about today. I think they were 7 for 260. So at that stage, you thought, that was more or less the sort of lead I thought India were going to get. If they'd been bowled out for, let's say, another 20 runs at that point. If you go back to what I said on day one, I thought Australia was still roughly in the game, and I thought that was a fairly fair score. The fact that India went on to score so many runs after that 7th wicket, it's just such a huge boom. And we've seen that from the tail of India of recent times, that these sorts of things have happened quite a lot. This is not a positive, because you're really happy that your lower order is doing well, but quite clearly you don't want them to be in a situation to have to keep saving you. But it's very, very interesting, those numbers. The only other thing that we had for today is just the left-handed opening batters in cricket. You could see that India has been the 3rd most difficult place to actually make runs in as a left-handed opener, and the most difficult in Asia. So recently, Australia's been to Pakistan and to Sri Lanka, but those are not particularly hard on left-handers when they're opening the batting. That's because Shami Siraj, probably Ishant Sharma, Umesh Yadav, Ashwin. Am I missing anyone? They're all really good against left-handers. So not only do you just have an off spinner who happens to be the best off spinner probably in the history of the game against left-handers, you then have a bunch of seamers who are also very good against left-handers as well. And Jadeja, for a left-arm finger spinner, has a fantastic record against it. So, Australia have 2 left-handed openers, which is, the 3rd opener in their squad is probably Renshaw. So you could argue that they brought 3 left-handed openers over here. And it just seems that this is not particularly the place to bring left-handers, or specifically left-handed openers. I've got some questions that came through in the chat, so I will get to them after a ad break, and I'll just read to see if there's anything else. But I don't know how we managed to get that much content out. Considering I think, I'm not sure, but so far this show might have gone longer than Australia's innings did. There is something wrong in the cricket world, and while it may not be a conspiracy, there does seem to be a movement towards leaving more grass on the wicket, and thusly, the global batting average has dropped. If a similar thing has happened to you in your personal life, try Manscaped. Their Lawnmower 4.0 will help you trim any unwanted pubic grass. And once your downstairs track is taken care of, you can also use Manscaped's liquid formulations. So before heading outside, use the Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant to stay cool in the heat. And if you've been playing too many games recently and you need some help with your strip, why don't you go and get their Crop Reviver? I think I may possibly have taken all of this analogy too far. But the point is, Manscaped sells items that allow you to shave your pubic itch pitch. Use the code REDINKER, all one word, which is the name of my podcast, and you can get a 20% discount and free worldwide shipping while you curate your special strip like a team of sweaty men hoping it doesn't rain. All right, let's get, in fact, remember, if you want your question absolutely answered on the mood board, although this is the last mood board for this test now, isn't it? But if you do want your questions answered on the mood board, Super Chat is the way to go, like Shrinath has done here. What is that? Czech francs? I don't even know what CHF. I'm not even sure what currency that is. Magnificent work. Anyway, Shrinath. He says he wishes that DRS was understood well. People claim it is dubious. Look, there are little errors in DRS. There's a really good podcast that I did with Kartikeya. Must have been a couple of years back now. One of the things that is really hard with DRS is when the ball hits the pad. And it's partly because that the pad obviously moves and is a soft material. And so you need the frame rate exactly right. Hawkeye people will tell you this all the time. And that little deviation can sometimes cause problems. There are just other things as well. We've had, the Hawkeye cameras just not be set up correctly at times. I remember someone was telling me, I can't remember, it might be Gaul. There was some place where there was like a shaky foundation, and they thought that might affect Hawkeye as well. It's a magnificent system. In some ways, look, people are going to complain anyway, right? Like, look at what's happened with all the other sports. Similar technology has come in. Hawkeye existing and DRS existing has changed the way that cricket is played forever. We'll never go back to the old method. LBWs. It was funny when Renshaw was hit, on the top of his pads today, and he thought to himself, well, that might be a bit too high. I think just in the old days, he would have just walked. He would have just been out. And he had the ability to have a look at that. And you don't get, now you don't get as many LBWs that are given on the field when the ball is massively too high. Whereas go back to Australian cricket in the 80s and 90s and some bad LBW. Bruce Reid had some of the best LBW decisions any human has ever got. Fantastic bowler, but geez, he got some good LBW decisions. Look, people don't understand the technology and they're never going to. And, there's all different kinds of fans out there. But yeah, in this particular test match, I don't think I had any huge problems with DRS. There was one no ball, although that's not DRS, is it? But there was one no ball that was bowled. I think it might have been Jadeja, where I thought it looked like to me there was something behind the line. And there was a couple, obviously, LBWs that could have gone either way, but that's always going to happen. That happened before DRS, of course. All right. DM says, is there any way back for Australia, or is 4-0 inevitable? Look, 4-0 is certainly not inevitable. There's rain. There might be a flat pitch. Steve Smith still looked like, a fairly good player in this match. So from that perspective, 4-0 is not inevitable. And if that was the case, then we would have said the exact same thing in Adelaide. We probably did. So when India looked really poor in Adelaide, we could have said the same thing. We could say the same thing now, but inevitable in test match cricket. Also, I do think things can change quite quickly with, a couple of tweaks that they'll make with the side, like Green coming back into the side, makes them a slightly stronger team than I think they are at the moment. But, I wouldn't bet against 4-0. There's a big difference between inevitable and thinking it's not a stronger possibility today. It's quite clearly a stronger possibility today than it was yesterday. Jay says, this was one of the least turning surfaces India prepared in the last 3 years. Oh, I never saw, I'm not sure if you're going off CricViz. I never saw anything from CricViz or on the TV that said that. I mean, Australia were spinning it at 3.2 degrees, I think, at one stage. That's up there, Jay. But I haven't seen all the numbers, so I'm not sure. I would say it was a slower spinning pitch. I think that's what Ashwin was talking about in the press conference at the end. I don't think that it had a lack of spin. And also, there was an inconsistent nature to the spin, right? There were some balls that were ragging, and there were other balls that weren't. I'm going to bet Delhi will offer more turn and probably quicker. Just a foregone conclusion. You would say so, but again, that goes back to the Adelaide comment, right? The test still has to play out. I mean, I thought coming in that Australia probably only had one chance of winning a test. I don't think the test that I think they're having one chance of winning has changed. But foregone conclusions and inevitable. We just saw them make what they make 80 odd, make not many runs, go for less time than this video has gone. When you see that, the obvious thing is always to say there's they're going to lose the next two tests, but that's not how these things always go about. But yes, again, you know, I've had the magic 8 ball. What's the one? Signs point to yes, is where I would go on that. Jarrod, what do you? Sorry, Don says, what are your thoughts on the umpire situation? They seemed a little bit more conducive to giving Indians the benefit of the doubt, both batting and bowling. Possibly some bias. I'd say the bias is probably more with you, Don, than any of the umpiring. I thought the umpiring was absolutely fine in this match. If you want to know why you thought more decisions went the way of India than Australia, it's because India created way more chances, and Australia created went for long periods of time where they didn't look like getting a wicket. If you are, this is how umpiring works. If you are regularly creating half chances and chances, eventually the umpires will give some of them out. And if you're not, the umpires quite often will defer, on-field umpires will quite often defer a little bit towards batting. There was absolutely no problems with the umpiring. And I thought, Nitin Menon is probably the best umpire in the world at the moment. I'm trying to think if there's someone better and I've just forgotten them. Yeah, no, I'd say I still think he's not quite as good as he was in his absolute peak period, but he's certainly probably, top 2 or 3 umpires in the world. Sorry, it just moved away from me. So I had no problem with the umpiring in this game. Nishant says this feels a lot about how India fold for 36 in their first test. Yeah, in some ways, and look, I've already mentioned it twice probably in these answers. In some ways, I think that's fair. Usually, so I cover a lot of test matches, a lot of series, I should say. The best thing that ever happens in a series, 90% of the time, is for the home team to lose the first test. Because usually what that means is, and sometimes you want the underdog just to win regardless, but more often than not, it's that you want the home team to lose the first test because that will keep the series alive a little bit longer. So yeah, you can, we can always point to the one-off sort of situation of Australia, Australia bowling India out and then India coming back and being magnificent in that series. But I think we also have to remember the many, many times where that does not happen. And of recent history, India is better at home than Australia is at home. So again, that would make it tough. I don't think Australia will bat as bad consistently in this series. I thought the first innings, they batted quite poorly and certainly should have got at least another 30 or 40 runs. And you might be like, well, that might not have made a big difference. But I think that considering that they had India, 260 for 70, 240 for 7 at one stage, that really does, those extra 30 or 40 runs would have mattered. And obviously they batted horrendously in the second innings. There's no other way of looking at that. But they're also probably bound to have one good innings. They're not going to, let's say, they're not going to have 6 more innings of the first innings or below, would be my guess. I mean, if they do, hey, I'm going to get a lot more sleep-ins. And B, it'll certainly be action-packed. Ananda says, Murphy and Lyon both bowled 50 overs. Akshar and Shami shouldn't have been allowed to score as much as they did. Australia really need another spinner, even if it's head. I mean, they could have, I was going to say they could have bowled Renshaw, but I suppose he was injured, which was probably a little bit unfortunate. At least he's a taller, different kind of off spinner, but fairly similar. I think you're right at a certain point, but I don't think you could say that that entire partnership happened because of that. I think the pitch obviously played a part in it. As I already talked about in the video, I thought Jadeja batted particularly very well. Shami was dropped as well early on. So perhaps what Australia lacked, and I haven't looked at Pat Cummins' figures, but I think, they just didn't. I think they probably should have tried a spell of short bowling to Shami at one stage and maybe should have gone to Boland for another reverse swing. So you have a point from that perspective. The problem with Head is, of course, he is another off spinner. And so now you're talking about having 3 off spinners, which is bizarre. But hey, let's go. Let's roll with it and see how it goes next time. But yes, they did look tired. I think even before the Shami incident, I thought they looked tired when Jadeja and Akshar were playing together with the new ball as well. And that's really probably when they needed, especially for Lyon, when he wants that a little bit of extra bounce, that's probably his time to get a wicket. And by then they did look a little bit cooked. Green is a huge game changer as well. If you don't have an all-rounder in this situation, it means that you are a little bit less flexible in that situation. And that's probably what has happened. Perhaps with Green, they have the option then of picking Agar. Wait, am I getting this right? Yeah, they have the option then of picking Agar. So you'd have Green, Agar, Murphy, and Lyon with Cummins in the side if they wanted to go that way, which is probably on this pitch would have been a slightly better option. But they then got rolled for under 100. So everything you're saying is right, but I'm not sure that this was the biggest difference. And also, not sure that Head would have added that much with battle ball in this test. I mean, we'll probably see next test. Arian says, do you think the Australia and the media focus too much on the pitch and this sort of distracted them? I don't think it distracts them, but I've told this story before. I think I told it on a recent show on Edges when I was on Edges, and so just go listen to them and subscribe to their podcast. They'll probably be recording tomorrow, actually. I got to Pune in 2016. People from inside the Australian camp let me know that there was a problem with the pitch. And I said, we're in India. It's going to spin. You're just going to have to deal with it. Then we got to Bangalore and someone again contacted me and said, oh, they've done it again. It's going to spin again. And I was like, well, you said that in the last game and you won. And we're still in India. Then we got to the next test and I stopped being league stuff entirely. And they did a similar thing. And I remember they told all the Australian press, oh, look how bad this pitch is. Look at the color of it. It's going to be impossible. And it was like, that was the wicket in Ranchi where it was almost impossible to get a wicket at all. And that was my first time of being in India, watching the way that they thought about it. And I've written about it a lot since. I don't think they think, and I've talked about the Australian team. Forget the media for a moment. Media doesn't matter, really. That's for us. It doesn't really matter. But it does matter if the Australian team is moaning about these things beforehand. And I really do think that is the wrong way to go about it. Whereas the right way to go about it is, looking at how Indians have made runs on pitches like this. We've now seen Rohit do it a couple of times on tricky surfaces like this. Ashwin's another really interesting one because he made runs on both of the surfaces I'm talking about again, the Chepuk and now here. I do think that focusing on the positives is much better. But this is a long history of Australian cricket coming to India and just thinking they're going to get done in. And I don't know how you get beyond that mentality. But looking at what I saw this week, I think that it's the same thing again, that they've come into it thinking it's all going to go badly, and it does. And it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy. And a lot of it isn't that the conditions aren't necessarily against them. It's that they are bringing the wrong kinds of players because they produce the wrong kind of players. And we've seen that with Asian teams go to Australia for years as well. These are very, very normal. Janae says, what changes would you make to Australia's next team? Well, Green would certainly come in even if he can't bowl. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to bowl in the next test, but he's certainly going to come in and he's going to bat. I would assume that they would drop Renshaw for Head. I'm not sure that's going to make a massive difference, but maybe it will. Maybe Head can play a little bit more like what Carey did and put some pressure back on. And I really like Renshaw as a player, but he looked, forget the first innings, but I didn't like how he looked in the second innings here. Some of the shapes he got into just felt like he wasn't there. Bowling, neither of the fast bowlers particularly bowled that much. the best option would actually potentially be Hazelwood and Stark. But obviously, it's probably going to be Hazelwood and Cummins, I would assume, if they're going to go in with the extra seamer. But I would probably, if Green can bowl, as I said, I'd probably go in with an extra spinner, if that's what the wicket's going to be like. And Agar also, and this was one of the worst tails Australian batting has ever had. Trying to, I would have to go back through the record. But I wonder if it's maybe one of the worst batting lineups Australia has had since the 80s, because you had Warne, Rifle, Brett Lee. I'm trying to think of some of the others. Yeah, there was always one guy who could bowl, one guy who could hold the bat, and another guy who could hold the bat. So I'm wondering if this is one of the worst tails we've seen from Australia from a very, very long time, perhaps back to sort of Mike Whitney, Merv Hughes, Craig McDermott era, off the top of my head. So again, that's another reason they might bring it. I mean, Agar's probably not an all-rounder, but I can certainly see that. Grove says, how much did Bharat's tweet and Aussie media's paranoia about selective ordering impact Aussie's selection? None, realistically. I mean, their selection, they only picked 2 spinners. If they were that paranoid, they wouldn't have picked. I don't think they would have. They would have picked another spinner altogether. No, I mean their selections were really more to do with the injuries they had, right? I think that's what probably had more to do with that. The rough that you're talking about with the left-handers and what Barrett's picture was showing never played a part in the game, because it's now. Let's say Australia had batted well, and Khawaja and Warner had got them off to 60 or 70 run partnership, which would probably be about now. That's when the rough would have played the part. That's the bit of the pitch that wasn't watered. It was never tested at all, that part of the pitch, because it wasn't needed by anyone. And the only person who ever really aimed at it for a long period of time when it was doing anything was probably Marnus. And I'm pushing long, long period of time here. But yeah, I think it is. I don't think Barrett's tweet played that much of a part. As I said, I think they were worried beforehand, and I think the selection was a lot more to do with who was available and what they ended up with. Although we can blame Barrett, and he'll hopefully he'll be free now on Monday, so he better be on the podcast, as long as we can get him in the right place at the right time. And I will be blaming him on the podcast, because why not? Vinay says, is this the best set of spin all-rounders you've ever seen? There's a question. So I wrote about this at one stage. I think I put a tweet up and people got really angry about it. But I was like, you can certainly have a situation where you regularly have Jadeja at 7, Ashwin at 8, and Akshar at 9, which is a ridiculously long batting lineup, and you're not losing anything in bowling. I mean, Shakib bats top 6, and Mahedi can bat a little bit. Warne, obviously not a mug with a bat, not quite. He's probably more an Akshar level batter, right? Actually, probably not even as good as Akshar, but not far away from that kind of level. Graham Swan could whack the ball when they weren't bounced at him, but certainly, he didn't have Monty Panesar at the other end. You probably could argue that the best spinning all-rounders that England had were at Nottingham at the time. So yes, I can't think of any off the top of my head. Because even if you look at someone like Garfield Sobers, who's obviously quite a good spinning all-rounder, his bowling, he was certainly a much better seam bowler than he was a spin bowler. Sanajay Surya wasn't really bowling with another all-rounder, and he's more of a batting bowler, although, I think he had the 3rd most Sri Lankan wickets for a very long time in Test cricket. I'm not sure how far down the list he is even now. And if you think about and then you've got someone like Richie Benaud. So Richie Benaud would have been paired up, and then you would have had then some of the early England spinners. I can't think of a situation where another team's had 2 spinners with the bowling talent that they have and and being able to match it before you figure in Akshar Patel. So that's just off the top of my head, though. Great questions. I am going to go to the comments and just take a couple of quick ones from the end, but to give me as much time as possible. I'm gonna find the ad. There's the ad, and I'm gonna play the ad, and then I'm gonna just quickly have a look at your questions.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
Beautiful. Oh, someone said Shahid Afridi. But again, Shahid Afridi never played with another. So if Shahid Afridi had played with Mohammad Hafiz, I'm trying to think of Shoaib Malik's test record, but I don't think he took a lot of test wickets. But even then, I don't think the two of them combined, or the three of them combined, would be anywhere near what we saw here. I'm going to answer this question as well. Memes around the globe says, "Can Washington Sundar bat at 5?" So I think in my 11, I had Washington Sundar at 6 in my fake all rounders 11, because that's the point, right? There is lots and lots of different. I think there really is lots and lots of different options available to them. Like if Washington played in this game, he just doesn't get a bowl, right? I mean, Akshar didn't really get that much of a bowl either. So I think from that perspective, it was a long, it was, they have so many options available to them. And I think it's really interesting that we're coming to a position where India no longer has batters who bowl a little bit, but their bowlers are starting to bat a little bit. And I'm not sure if that's a professionalism thing, because both of those things kind of reek out of professionalism, right? So once you get to a level where, if you're Rohit Sharma, you can bowl a little bit of off spin, but there's 83 net bowlers who can bowl off spin, and there's someone to do throwdowns. You don't need to bowl in the nets a little bit more. But the opposite is true if you're a professional bowler. Yeah, right. If you're a professional bowler, you keep working on your batting. Look at Ashwin always working on his batting. Even someone like Nathan Lyon, constantly, been working on their batting. And we saw that almost. It's probably, Glenn McGrath is probably the best example of that, of someone who purposely worked on that in a way that previous tailenders didn't. So if you do have any latent batting ability, you should be able to get it to a certain level, unless there's just like a stunning flaw within your batting style. Do you know what I mean? You can't pick the ball up when it's over 75 miles an hour or whatever that may be. And then, good luck to you. I've said that twice in this video. Disgusted in myself. All right. Hikaru says, Agar should have played handy with the bat. Okay, so handy with the bat, yes. Not really going to change anything. I don't think he was about to, make any runs against Ashwin from that perspective. And once Green wasn't playing, I think Agar was probably dropped at that point. They thought Murphy was the better bowler. Based on the 2 Shield games I've seen and this, Murphy is quite clearly a much better bowler than Ashton Agar. Ashton Agar also doesn't play as much red ball cricket as probably people think. And he's sort of thrown into these situations. I sort of see him, and I don't mean this as any disrespect, because I think he's kind of a fantastic, what if Justin Langer called him something really early on in his career, and I thought it was so bizarre. I called him a fantastic cricket athlete, or a great cricket athlete. And Agar is like that. He can kind of do everything to a certain level, but he's not a top quality test match bowler. And he's certainly not a number 7 test match batter, despite the fact that occasionally when he makes runs in Australia, people think about that. He's not at that level. In a pinch, sure. I mean, in a pinch, Keshav Maharaj and Simon Harmer have batted at number 7, but over a consistent amount of time, no. You'd probably prefer him to bat at 8 or 9. Maybe 8 ahead of with Cummins or Stark behind him. That would be quite handy from that perspective. But these things may not end up being the case. But Agar isn't changing anything in this test match. Absolutely not. And if Agar had played in this test match, it means that Murphy would not have played. So, not perfect. Dimitri says, I know I mentioned Australia playing strike rotating shots in the first innings, 3%. But I think you saw it again today. It's probably no coincidence that only Manas looked okay, just getting pinned. So I think what I was trying to say, Dimitri, if you were around for the start of the video, is I don't think that it's Australia not playing strike rotating shots. I think it's early on them going into this sort of survivalist mode when they first get to the crease. I think once they start to bat, they have those other shots, but they don't feel comfortable on the surface. So I think what they're trying to do at the moment is very much, you saw with Warner, he either hit fours or he defended. There really wasn't, I think there was like one shot he tried to poke into the offside, and that was a poorish ball from Ashwin. He probably could have even gone further at that. And in the end, he didn't even, I don't even think he scored a run off that particular ball. And he kind of spooned it up on the offside, oddly. They're just not thinking about things correctly. And that goes back to all the stuff we've been saying so far about how they've batted and everything else. So I can certainly see that from that perspective. I didn't mean to highlight this one, but Gillespie could always bat. So he was another one. Back in the old days. So they are certainly missing that. And if you sort of think about that sort of, Stark and Cummins, as Cummins' test batting has got work, Starks has got better. Starks' numbers over the last couple of years are extraordinary. And he also has a fairly good record in India. I think that's possibly boosted by the one innings a little bit more than you would want. But I do think that he has a pretty good record in India as well. Overall. But yeah, again, so that was another play they didn't have. So they did have that longer tail there. AK says, given Murphy can bowl well, can Australia play another spinner turning it the other way? So I think the better question here is, I've already talked about Agar coming in. The really interesting question right at the moment is, if Green can't bowl, and therefore, they're probably just going to go in with 4 specialist bowlers again. And Head is probably going to come in for Renshaw. Or if Renshaw plays, Renshaw's probably going to bowl more. Hopefully, there's no problem with his knee. The bigger question here, AK, is Murphy bowled that well. Should Agar be his partner? And that's a hugely risky thing, I think, for the Australians to go about, just because even, I talked about it in the video, Lyon is not a ceiling raiser, but he is a floor raiser, right? He gives you, even when we can be disappointed by his overall figures, and I thought he bowled poorly at times, he's still quite clearly an international quality spinner. And, he is putting some pressure on, but although I think he was particularly bad there. That's a huge thing to go with a guy who doesn't play a lot of red ball cricket and a young player who's going to be playing in his second match, who's going to be struggling to overcome, second test blues after what happened in his first test. So I think that's a really, really tricky situation for Australia to be in. But perhaps if Green isn't fit, they just don't have a choice. I have to go through all the different players. And with Head coming in, that does mean that they then have a better, what would you call him, a 5th bowling option available to them if Head comes in there. So it's quite interesting. I'm going to play one more break, and then I'm going to just have a look to see if there's any last questions, and then we will finish up.
If you love the language of cricket and want more, then head over to the 99.94 app, and you can hear all of our podcasts and cricket commentary. We're adding new shows all the time and covering cricket series from all over the world. Be the first to hear all of our announcements by following us on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation.
Great. Let's just have a look at what else have we got here. This is an interesting question. Oh my God. Sorry, there's something about this. It just keeps flicking out of the comments just as I'm getting to them. But all right. Okay. Perfect. I'm trying to find some questions on India. Indian players play 407. That's interesting. It's very interesting. All right. Some good ones just to finish off here. Hoping I've got them all. Cool. All right. So we had another super chat from Memes Around the Globe. I've already asked his question, and he's still done a super chat. So gets a second mention. Well done, Memes Around the Globe. And Mr. Mojo has also sent a super chat in. He says, do you think that the Australian team bought the media narrative that the pitch is a minefield or doctored? As I said, and as someone who's traveled with them, they start this narrative. They would have thought this narrative absolutely beforehand. The doctored part is interesting because I have seen them focus on that before, and I have thought to myself, does it matter? Right? The minefield one is the one that I think is the more interesting one. I think they think no matter what, they're going to be playing on minefields in India. This pitch spun, but it was slow, and there was certainly a big difference between the level of the Indian spin and the level of the Australian spin. It wasn't quite Akshar Patel to Ashwin that we saw with New Zealand, but Murphy to Ashwin, if you're comparing the two best spinners, there's still, and I thought Murphy bowled really, really well, but there's still a huge difference between those two. But no, the media narrative, they are involved in the media narrative. So that's a side issue. It's for us to worry about that sort of stuff. It's not for them. But you say the Australian team is chock full of excellent cricketers. It's also chock full of players who are not particularly good at spin, right? So when we say that, we have to be really clear. Travis Head is not playing in this test match because Australia does not think he can play spin, right? David Warner does not have a particularly good record in Asia against Ashwin, obviously, or away from home, right? They brought Peter Hanscom back essentially because he's right-handed, and they were a little bit worried about the situation. Chock full of great cricketers. I don't know, man. I thought they were a big chance of losing this series 3-1. A lot of people now probably thinking, and rightfully, 4-0 as an option. I didn't look at the way they played this test and be like, outside of Smith and Labuschagne, I just didn't see anyone who I thought had the ability over a long period of time to score off the spinners. Happy to be wrong with that, but that's not how I saw it. Thank you for the super chat, Mr. Mojo. Pratik says, can Carey open in the place of Warner? I like this, Pratik. Probably not, but I like this a lot. Because I was thinking that with Renshaw as well. I was like, if you're going to play him, you might as well open. Because we have seen with Renshaw that he did look very, very good at times in India as someone who got into his innings a little bit. It's just a different thing coming in the middle order, right? I know he's batted in middle order in other formats, and I haven't even looked at where he's been batting for Queensland recently. But he just feels like such an opener to me in red ball cricket. Carey in place of Warner, just not sure he's going to be good enough against Shami and Siraj with the new ball. That would be my first worry. My second worry then is if he is sweeping everything against the new ball. They've got two options then. One, it's going to skid low occasionally, and the other is going to get more bounce. So he's going to miss some, and LBW and bowl become a big option, and then he's got the other chance of getting a top edge. I just don't think it suits how Carey plays. However, by the third test, they might be doing this. How do you expect Green to do in India? He did okay in Sri Lanka. Yeah, I thought he batted well. I think he's we've seen him play top quality spin at times. Good. I think the Indian spinners are just better than everyone else's spinners by a distance. So that is going to be tough. Sri Lanka, usually the ball spins further than it does in India. Having played in Sri Lanka, I think would give you a little bit of confidence. But there was a couple of guys in this test match who played in Sri Lanka as well. I'm not expecting Green in the last three tests to average over 35. But if he averaged 30 for his age and his experience, I think, I know it's going to sound bad because, that probably means Australia have lost the series, right? But, 4-0, I should say. But I would think that would be a reasonable expectation to have of a young player coming over in their first time. If he does better than that, good luck to him. He might have missed the pitch that that he should have missed, or we might be saying that this was the good pitch in a couple of pitches time. Vishal says Indian bowlers play 487 balls between them. There must be a record that they've broken in this innings. Well, I'm not sure because I was talking about that test match in Trent Bridge, so I don't know. Like percentage of balls faced between top 6 and bottom 5, those sorts of things actually happen more often than you would think. And you've also got to remember that back in the old days, sometimes batting orders were changed because if you had sticky wickets, especially in Australia, you might sometimes rotate the batting order, and you might have your best players at 7, 8, and 9, and have your tail up the order. So it's probably not an all-time record. It might be a record for India because trying to think of other matches where that might have happened. But yeah, no, I certainly don't think that this is an all-time record. But for India, it's very interesting. But this is where they win the game, right? Australia when they had them 240 for 7. I think that's right. I keep getting my numbers mistaken on that one. When they had them at that point, they were not that far away from giving themselves a position to be in the game. They still would have had to bat well. They still would have had to make 250, 300, which, based on what we just saw, which is now officially, that innings is now officially shorter than this video. I have no idea if that's true. I might have made that up as well. But yeah, I think we saw, if they did have the ability to make that 250, 300 in that third innings, when it was good enough for Shami and Siraj to bat for long periods of time, and Australia, they wouldn't have had the scoreboard pressure on them. Ashwin might still Ashwin, and Jadeja might still Jadeja, and it doesn't matter. But they certainly would have put themselves in a much better position. So the rear guard by Akshar, that's why I featured it so heavily in the at the start of the video, was so incredibly important from that perspective. Oh, and that's me. Then I've got the Carey question again. Please try not to spam the questions. I do actually read through all of them. It's just that there's no way I'm ever going to be able to get to all of them. And sometimes, obviously, they're a little bit behind when it comes to those sorts of things. But thank you so much for everyone for coming out on the video today. We will do another video tomorrow. It won't be a live. But I want to do a deeper dive into kind of everything that went wrong for Australia in this particular test match. As I hinted at the top, I was trying to write that piece as quickly as I could, but I could not be as quick as the Australian batters were being dismissed. We've also got some other great World Cup, Women's World Cup content for you. Very, very enjoyable opening game. Home team losing is probably not what the ICC wants in the first game, but I thought it was a good game of cricket. Sri Lanka kind of tried to belt South Africa out of the game a couple of times, and South Africa kept fighting their way back into it, but just weren't good enough. Apparently, not having one of your best middle order players and your top order players in a chase like that is really important. Who knew? But there's going to be plenty of content over the next couple of days that we'll be doing here. So like, subscribe, tell your friend, get a tattoo of my face on your bicep, whatever you need to do, and support your local 99.94 podcast. We've got heaps of those coming up as well. We have, as I said, Edges and Surges will probably record. The Indian podcast will go, and if you're a fan of another team, they will be doing stuff as well, and we'll be trying to cover India, Australia, and the Women's World Cup here, and then obviously England, New Zealand will be covering that as well when that gets about. Basically, I'm doing everything all at once, which is, I think, my natural state. But again, we will certainly have another video tomorrow, and I'll be back very soon, and we'll try and record on Monday with Bharat, and then we can all ask him directly how he cost Australia Test match